think you're on mute.
I said, good question.
Okay. Well, it is 6 o'clock. Do we get started? Or
Let's get rolling.
okay. All right. 6 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. Reading the district's mission statement. I can do that. Our district will empower learning, energize achievement, and enhance community excellence without excuse. It is Teacher Appreciation Week, so we want to thank all of you teachers out there that may be watching. Thank you for your dedication to our children, especially during this very difficult time for everyone. I had the privilege of being able to hear some of you teach some of my nieces and nephews, and I think you guys are all doing an amazing job. So thank you from all of us. We really appreciate all your dedication. Any additional items for the agenda? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
That's Kelly Heitkamp. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
That's Tim Elke. Do you want to do the roll call, Wendy?
Yes. Cahill?
Yes.
Heitkamp?
Yep.
Kane?
Yes.
Elke?
Yes.
Sykes?
Yes.
Burke?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes 7-0. Recognition of visitors in open forum. I didn't receive anything, so I think we're good to move on. Reports. Special education report. Is Heather on? Kurt? Or oh,
Yes,
it looks like
Heather did just sign in.
Okay.
Before we pass it over to Heather, I do want to give a brief introduction. If you remember, this was actually on our board agenda, March meeting for the work session, and then got postponed due to COVID. I do want to introduce Heather Harms. Many of you know her, but if you don't or haven't spent any time with her, again, Heather works for 4 districts between us, Waseca, WEM, and New Richland, that district. And so I do want to point out it's her and Deanna Grodseth, who are 2 of the best special education administrators that have ever been around. And then we're fortunate, extremely fortunate. And I'm not just saying it because she's on the line, but I've told her this many times. We're extremely fortunate with her knowledge and her dedication to our staff and to our kids. So this cooperation between 4 districts has been extremely beneficial. So I'm going to just pass it over to her then.
All right. Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate those kind words. So last year when I presented the annual report, I spoke about, thank you. I spoke about the history of special education, what is special education, what are disabilities in Minnesota, and how that whole process of qualifying for special education works. This year, I went a little bit further and added some information at the beginning of the annual report regarding free appropriate public education and what that is. And then IDEA is the special education law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that we follow and are often quoted by others, parents, whatnot, that making sure that we are providing the best public education that we can for students with disabilities. So I won't go through everything, but if you do have questions about the content, please let me know. The other pieces that I did add this year that are different that usually cause a lot of questions and phone calls from supers and principals is special education transportation and kind of the rules and regs behind when we have to transport a student with a disability and when we do not. And how then do case managers make determination on if a student qualifies for special transportation? So that's on page 3 of the document. I gotta shut my door a little further. Someone's doing dishes. So that is on page 3. I also gave you some information on our platform as a organization and what we're looking for from the legislature. We were at the Capitol, I think it was May 6th. And then just a week later, we went into closure for COVID. So we are really looking at increasing educational efficiencies. Special transportation is a big one. There's a couple cases going on with special transportation with some districts who are paying high costs for special tran. Looking at enrollment options, looking at the ADSYS grant, which JWP has. Right now, that grant says that any student on an IEP cannot access those interventions through ADSYS. And what special ed is saying is, but wouldn't you want some students who perhaps are speech only to access a reading interventionist instead of adding that to special education to increase services on special ed? So looking at least restrictive environment. So there is some talk at the legislature about adding some students who have IEPs being able to access that ADSYS. However, they have tied private duty nurses into that. And what that would mean is that a family can say, this is my nurse and I want that my nurse to be at school with my child. And that does cause some conflicts with confidentiality and staffing and such. So that is part of the ADSYS grant. Of course, increasing mental health services, especially now after being in distance learning for the time that we have been, we're hearing about more and more needs for our students and their families. We're looking at reducing paperwork, looking at licensure for Minnesota, increasing other pathways to get licensed, and having PELSB recognize those that come from out of state. And that's part of our recruitment and retainment of teachers, because we really struggle to find fully licensed special education teachers. And then, of course, always funding is part of our platform. And then on page 4, again, I gave you the breakout of our district's special education population by disability versus the state population. And I won't go through all those, but I will call out one. We're looking at speech language impairment. We're going to need to do a little bit more research on why we have such a high percentage. So right now, JWP percent is at 28% of our population receives speech, special ed population, and the state average is 15.5. So we are quite high compared to state. When the Department of Education sees that we have what's called disproportionality, so really high numbers in qualification of a student with a certain disability versus the state, or we're suspending too many students who are Black, or any of those different categories, we get a year 1, year 2, or year 3 letter. A year 1 letter is just saying, hey, you have way too many, in our case, speech kids identified. You could do something, or just know that you have too many kids qualifying. It looks like you have too many kids qualifying. So we are going to look at that, because a year 3 letter implies we have to shift some of our federal dollars, state dollars into another pot and train staff in the area that we get cited for. So we do not want to get a year 3 letter because we are qualifying too many students for speech. So we will be working with our speech path. Deanna, the assistant director, is a speech pathologist background. So she will be probably taking the lead on that. The other, on page 5, at the top of page 5, we went through, we're almost through MDE compliance of our records. And we came out of that with no citations. And then I did send kind of an update of the staff survey that we got back from MDE, just looking at some of the needs of the district, just based on the staff survey. And that was paras, general education staff, special education staff, administration, as well as our related service providers such as OT, PT, speech. And so the MDE monitor who I was talking with said, because she did all 5 of the districts, And she's like, JWP sounds like they're a very happy and friendly and complimentary district. And I'm like, yep, absolutely. So a lot of positives that came out of the staff survey, a lot of compliments, and not too many, I wouldn't say concerns, but some questions on some policies and procedures that we just need to clean up. We don't have a policy that says that we delay an evaluation if a student is a second language, English is a second language. And we don't have a deadline for stopping initial evaluations. Those are two things that came up. And I think there was a question on if we had a seclusion room or not. And so we do not. We don't have a seclusion room. We don't believe in seclusion. And so just needing to clean up some of those questions that came out of that survey. And then, Kurt, I think the only other thing I wanted to draw your attention to, and it's not part of the report because it just came to me, is every year we calculate percentages that for the districts that I serve based on special ed child, child count. And last year, JWP paid 20% of the special education contract. And that includes myself and Deanna and Angie Lund, who's our administrative assistant. Next year, that will be dropping to 19% because you had a reduction in your overall special education count by, I want to say 7 or 8 students. So there's a 1% savings, Matt. And then the last few pages are the same as the last annual report from last year, just really looking at what staff support JWP, what percent is their contract. So that is what I had. Oh, I did add for myself that every year I have to turn in a restrictive procedure summary of how many holds we did and how many seclusions. We did not do any holds during the 17-18 school year, and we had 5 incidents of holds. So not too bad. And I think this year, I don't have the final data, but I think we had 2 or 3 up until March when we went remote. So that's a good sign. Any questions? Hi, Jake.
Hi, this is Tim Elke. Just as a refresher, because I honestly do not remember. So you were talking about we were high in the speech area with students. Yep. Who does the testing to determine if the student needs help or not?
So the speech pathologists do their testing, and they have, so there's 2 different types of ways students can qualify for speech. It's for articulation, and so there's state criteria that determines if a student would qualify for articulation, and there are assessments that are required to determine if a child qualifies for a language disability. In those 2 areas, kids qualify for speech language. So it's our own speech pathologists who are doing the assessments. So it might not necessarily be an initial that we're qualifying too many people initially. It may be that we aren't dismissing students as quickly as we could be. So that could be a reason why we have high numbers, is that we're not dismissing. But the criteria for qualifying for speech is pretty cut and dry. Does that answer your question, Tim?
I think most of it, part of it towards the end, at least on my end here, cut out. So I don't know if it's my computer or if it's yours or whatever. So I didn't catch some of it at the end. Okay.
And I think at the end of my explanation was just really talking about there's criteria set by the state of Minnesota, and that the speech path have to follow. So you give an assessment, and there comes data, and that data is used to make those determinations. So you can't really, it's pretty cut and dry. You can't really fudge those numbers. Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So Heather, on the survey, when you talked about the seclusion room, they ask about that, and if we don't believe in that, how do we rectify that against the survey? What do we need to tell them that?
So what I'm hoping is that we have related service providers from other districts. So JWP has someone who serves from Minnesota Valley Ed District. Isn't that right, Kurt? And another one. So maybe they just don't know because they're not really here very often. They come and serve 1 or 2 kids, and they don't really know the ins and outs of the day-to-day of JWP. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we just need to do a better job of communicating that. Last August, we had all 5 districts come together, and we physically demonstrated what seclusion looked like, or people could use blocking egress. And so we talked about seclusion rooms, that we don't have any rooms that, are a certain size, that have ventilation, that have the fire code, that have locking doors that automatically open if a fire alarm goes off. So those types of things we don't have. And so we showed seclusion in terms of a room, but we also showed what blocking egress might mean, because blocking egress could be seen as you're secluding a child. So if a child is trying to elope from your building and you're standing in front of the door blocking their way, being a physical barrier, not physically holding them back, just standing there being a physical is not blocking egress. If the student comes at me and I'm physically holding them back and not letting them out the door, or I'm holding the door shut, that's blocking egress. And so we're trying to differentiate between those things with staff. But there's so much to differentiate in special education that, I don't blame them for not remembering everything.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Everything that
thank you,
you do, you're more than welcome to stay on, but other than that, Kurt, she doesn't need to be on more if you don't want to. So, but thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
All right, sounds good. Reach out anytime if you need anything or if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Laura, I see Jake Hager, ALC principal, joined us. Do you mind if we jump to new business B and then jump back since he did join us?
Sure. Yep.
Great. Jake, can you just say hi and then I'll introduce, make sure your speaker's working. And
can everybody hear me?
We can.
Great. So
Awesome.
we're going to jump to new business B, ALC agreement. And this is going to be on your agenda for the May 18th meeting. And Jake is a new director of the Waseca Area Learning Center. And so he's here to answer questions. I don't have a big report, but I do want to give some background information. In my prior district last year, this was a big deal because the state is now coming down hard on districts of saying, you need to belong to an ALC and have an agreement in place in order to receive funding for targeted services and some other programming. So we've always had this handshake deal between us, Waseca, WEM, and New Richland, but never something documented. And so this cooperative agreement that's shared with you, us superintendents along with Jake met a couple times and came up with this agreement. And I can let Jake explain a little bit more about the ALC or be open-ended to questions, but I do want our board members to know a couple things. That number one, just because we belong to their ALC, when we have a kid or a student who is credit deficient and decides to go to the Waseca ALC, they are technically open enrolling to Waseca. So all funding for that kid follows them to Waseca. So they're technically not our student at all. So which I'm not here to put Waseca Area Learning Center out of business. I do think that we're trying to look internally to keep as many kids here as we can and to provide a great learning opportunity for kids to stay within our district. But yet that is an option for some of our students. So that's one thing. And I would say the other piece that it becomes tricky that we could delve into a long time, but I don't necessarily think we need to get into a lot tonight, is the transportation. We know that these are some kids who have some extenuating circumstances that might not allow them to have transportation, yet we want them to help graduate and give every opportunity we can. But they're technically not our kids. So how that works with us working with Waseca and area districts to help them with transportation, even though we don't get funding, is one other hurdle that we jump into. So there's an agreement. And basically, Waseca has become financially solvent the last 2 years where their expenses don't exceed their revenues. That wasn't the case before. But as far as that goes, I think they're on board. Now with Jake's leadership. So, Jake, if you have anything else to add to that conversation, feel free.
Well, I think the big thing, like Kurt was saying, is right now it's not just the Waseca ALC that's going through this process or our districts that are going through this process. The majority of the districts and ALCs in the state are going through this process right now just because it seems like the state doesn't have any of these agreements, and neither do the districts. So a majority of the ALCs are going through this process right now. And personally, I love it because oftentimes ALCs are just sort of pushed to the back and just not really talked about. They're usually appreciated when it comes up, but actually getting to, go through this process and work with each of the districts, I think is huge because this is just my own thoughts as far as ALCs go, is our name is Waseca ALC, but I view myself, I'm a Blue Jay, I'm a Bulldog, I'm a Buccaneer, I'm a Panther. Even though we're technically Waseca's on the name, one thing I love about this is I view myself as part of, and the program is, we are each of the districts, and that's what I love about it. So.
Laura, I don't know if you want to open it up to questions. I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for Jake.
Jake or Kurt, do we know how many of students are enrolled from JWP at the ALC?
So right now, total we have 60 students. Well, actually 61 as of today. And then of those 61, 10 of them are from the Janesville area.
Thank you.
Yep. And like Kurt was talking about with transportation, I think it is, no matter how you go about it, it is a slippery slope. But the great thing about ALCs is by the time a majority of the people come to an ALC, they're 17, 18, 19 years old. And a majority of them do have their own transportation. But when we're talking about that, we're talking about, like from Janesville, out of those 10, it's only 3 students as far as needing that transportation. But it is a huge barrier. That's the toughest part about it all.
How does that work for the summer credit recovery? So they're still technically JWP students at that point in time. It's just if they go to the Waseca ALC during the school year is when we technically lose the funding for that child, correct? Or that student? Yep.
So if they're coming over in the summer or whether it's credit recovery in the evening, they're still the student of whichever district they're coming from, whether that's Janesville, Waterville, New Richland.
And how many students would you say come from JWP for credit recovery in the evening in the summers?
So for credit recovery during the school year, on average, it's been between 3 and 5 throughout the whole year. And then for the summer, and we're still taking students right now, but it's going to end up being between 15 and 20 students are coming in the summer. Now, hopefully, as we keep going forward and improving the program and creating new and different opportunities for credit recovery, those numbers will be going up as well. So, because we're here just to help as much as we can. So.
Anybody else have any questions? Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Jake.
For joining us.
Awesome.
Nice meeting you.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And you're more than welcome to stay, but we understand if you need to leave. So thank you.
Sounds good. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too. All right, so we'll jump back up to 6B, superintendent update.
Yes, real quick. Again, a COVID-19 update. Of course, we're in distance learning through the end of the school year. We expect to receive some guidance from MDE on graduation. And as you probably saw, we sent out a message to all district families today with a couple things. Number one, our feedback that we got from parents and what we're doing about it, from their survey. The second one was strategic planning for our community and a sign up there. And then the third one is just a running list of what we know and what we don't know yet. And there's a lot of things that we don't know. Graduation, Mr. Hanson, our high school principal, has worked with the senior advisors along with 8 students to try and come up with a plan A, B, and C for graduation. And of course, an in-person one would be best, even with social distancing, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. But they are working on that. But MD is going to come out with some guidance, we hope, this week. And I think Laura set in some MSBA workshops too. And so I would say graduation comes up a lot and grading comes up a lot. And we're still working with our staff. So far we've kept grading the same and just tried to give more grace with grading, and yet knowing that we can still make some decisions down the road if we do want to do something different. But Mr. Hanson is going to work with his high school PLC to see if that's the right path. And I think Mr. Erler is working with his elementary PLC. Food service, we're up to about 450 students that we serve daily breakfast and lunch to, and of course that number keeps going up. Otherwise, I'll open it up for questions if anybody has anyone's on COVID or anything else.
I did like that list that you sent out of what we do know, what we don't know. And yeah, I agree. There's still a lot of unknowns out there, but that was very nice to have that out there for the families to see. Yeah,
my administration team and I thought it was important, even though we don't have the answers, we wanted to communicate to parents. We are thinking about it. This is on our list. We just don't have the answers yet. Because just like we are pushing people above us and, MDE to give us some, but we at least want people to know we're thinking about it. Yeah, I think that's great. It helps with any questions of wondering what's going to happen. Regarding food service, do they need more help? Is this a good avenue to say if anybody is willing to help to contact somebody? The great thing about food service, yes, they do need a little bit. I know this Thursday and next Monday, Sarah Myhawk, our food service director, asked for more help. I literally put out email to staff on last Thursday. And within 3 hours, we had, 12 people sign up and all spots full, just with people saying, sure, I'll volunteer my time. So the cool thing is, yes, we do. And the awesome thing is that our staff just pitches in and says, I'll help out. I'll give, 2 hours here or 2 hours there. Okay, that's awesome. Just let any of us know if you need any additional help too. So thank you.
Hey, Kurt, with the summer meals, it doesn't look like we're going to hit that 50%. So have we heard anything more about the state and the funding on that?
Yes, this is pretty typical. The state is giving us some mixed guidance. Sarah and I are pretty sure we can go through the end of June, even without meeting the 50% threshold of free and reduced lunch students, that percentage. Although I think now they're going to allow school districts to do it the entire summer, even if you don't meet the 50% threshold. But again, there's some mixed messages that they're sending out. So Sarah and I are both trying to work our contacts to figure out if we can actually go through the end of the summer, even if we don't meet it. We have gotten word that we can, but then it was different in a different spot of their guidance. So.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Kurt, speaking of the volunteers, do we have to do anything special with if you have up to 12 or 13 people coming in to work in the food service, or are they just allowing anybody to come in? How's that work?
Yeah, we're allowing, it's basically our staff who is volunteering. And when they're working without social distancing, and even in the kitchen, even if they're not, they're constantly wearing masks, which are provided by the school district. And I know we had some community members donate those masks. And so I would say, yes, they're wearing masks. And when we're handing out food or outside, I wasn't sure if they were wearing masks when they're outside today, but my guess is that they work as they're interacting with the public.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, we'll go to 6C, strategic planning update.
Yes, we are continuing to move forward with the strategic planning. So today we had 3 sessions with our staff. Staff were assigned to one of those 3 sessions, and they lasted about an hour. And we had about 110 out of our 120 staff participate in it. And it was all virtual, and it was done through Zoom. We did a large group presentation for about 10 minutes, and then through Zoom, they randomly assigned people to small groups and then had their discussions within small groups, and we gave them some tasks, brought back to a large group, and did the small group thing again. So for me, it was really productive and great to see us continuing moving forward, just because I hate to be at the standstill. I feel like we've gained a lot of momentum this year, and trying to get staff input now. And next Tuesday, we've got the same mechanism for students and our community to give input. And then look for the board on May 18th to have some discussions around all that input and where we want to go. And Bruce Miles has been leading those discussions. So I guess my question to board members is that if we could block off from 4 to 6 on May 18th for a work session before our regular board meeting to review the input that our staff and community and students give us, and see if that time works for people.
Okay, yeah, we can get back to you later on that.
Yep.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
All right, everybody just check your calendars, see if that works for you, and let myself or Kurt know. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll go on to 6D, the Finance Committee. We did meet, oh God, what day was it? Last Wednesday, I think, at noon, and discuss some budget revisions and stuff, especially with this whole COVID-19 stuff going on, and looked over the projections for enrollment. We did discuss the possibility of deficit spending, but we went from 180,000 to back up to 90,000. Did I get that right? So it's looking better and better each time we review it. So let's see, is there anything else big that I missed there, Kelly or Tim Burke?
No, I'll just add, Matt's on the line, and when we get to fiscal year 20 budget update and fiscal year 21 budget, he'll give another brief overview and take questions at that time too.
Yep. Okay. Any questions from anyone? All right, 6E, board member reports.
I wasn't sure, I put this on there, I wasn't sure if anybody else has anything to report, or I know the MSBA has given some guidance on some different things, so I wasn't sure who has participated in some of those sessions.
Yeah, I think I participated in most of the ones that you did. There was one which Kurt and I talked after the fact that was kind of weird. They had all well, I don't know if it was the chairs or if it was school board, but they didn't have any superintendents on it. But there really wasn't much that came of it. They just took our questions and then came back the next session and addressed some of those. And that's when they included all the superintendents on that one. So we really don't have a lot of answers right now, just like Kurt presented in what he sent out to all the families. Anyone else attend anything? Okay. All right, we'll go on to old business. The summer hours are back to the Monday through Thursday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And when does that officially start, Kurt?
I think this will start in June the 1st.
Sorry, I'm not moving around enough, I guess. Lights keep going up on me. Okay, June 1st. All right. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, if not, new business, the history field trip.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure the board and I were under the same understanding. So as you saw in the letter from Howard that went out to students, this year's trip is being postponed to next year. He plans to do 2 trips next year. He's going to work with students on refund or transfer or just transferring funds over to next year. So I think that's pretty clear cut. I did talk to Howard, and I want to make sure I'm listening to the board that in board policy, it does say that extended field trips that go overnight do need to come before the board. And this happens every year, and it's a great trip for our students, so I'm not concerned about that. But Howard did say a couple of years ago he came before the board, and the board did give him just approval to continue this trip every year, which is why he hasn't came before the board, or there wasn't a plan to do that this year because he was granted that permission, which, like I said, I'm fine with, but I just want to make sure that we're all under that same understanding because we did have softball go through that process last year. So I'll leave it at that and let people ask questions or comments.
No, we left it with Howard. He's done such a great job with that history trip that I think as a board, I don't know how many years ago that was. We just said that there's no sense of getting an approval. It's through the administration and Howard. So
I think that one's a little different than the softball because softball was during the school year, where the history trip is in the summer. Unless somebody feels different about that approval for the history trip.
And it was the first time also.
The softball one, right?
Yes.
You're referring to, yeah.
So the question I have then, and I did not get a chance to read Howard's letter, but for the seniors were there any seniors going this year? And I do not remember, but there was talk, and maybe you guys can help me remember that he didn't want seniors to go on it after they've graduated, I should say. I don't remember if that actually came to fruition or not, but if there's, from my understanding, they base the cost on this per, like, let's say 60 kids. So what happens if 20 of these kids now don't want to go next year? How's that funds going to be, or how's he going to run that? Or do those other kids have to pay extra? Again, I didn't read his letter, so I apologize.
Yeah. The quick answer to you is that if the trip would have happened this summer in July, this was the smallest number of students that he was ever going to bring because of the softball trip took away some kids. And it's nothing against the softball trip. It was just a small number to begin with. So they only needed 1 bus. So transportation is a big thing, I believe, when you talk about these trips, because you're buying tickets, you're buying hotel rooms, and that's based upon the number of students. It's that if you have to add a bus for 2 extra kids, or you don't fill up a bus close enough. So I don't think it's going to be a problem next year. And to answer your first question, I had the same concern that you had, Tim, but I think all of us, I hate to speak for the board, but Howard's just done a phenomenal job with this trip. And I have total faith in his judgment. And when I brought up that question to him, he goes, Kurt, it's those kids that really want to go. So if they're willing to go after they've graduated, he goes, those have been some of the best leaders that I've had, because they actually want to learn and want to have the experience. And so while he was concerned about that early on in his career, he said that's not a concern for him because those kids really want to go and are leaders.
Well, I know my son who graduated participate after he was a senior. Aaron's planning on it. And Tim, I don't believe that it was Howard. I believe it was the previous administration that was thinking about not allowing seniors to go. So.
Yeah, and I didn't say it was Howard. I just remember there was discussion because there were some incidents of some other kids that were after they graduated and the only recourse is you send them home. But so I didn't remember, so I just figured I'd ask. So thanks.
Just to add to that, we do have, I believe it's sitting in my mailbox. Howard provided me a list. I think it was 9 students that are going to need refunds. Other than that, I think he reached out to everyone and they're either rolling it to next year or making other plans. So.
And let me make sure I add, when Matt says refunds, he means if the kid deposited money towards the trip, they get a refund of that money. If I fundraised by selling pizzas, we can't give refunds for them fundraising on the multiple different fundraisers that happen. It can only be if they deposited money themselves for the trip.
Yes, thanks for clarifying that.
All right, any other questions? Okay, if not, it looks like Matt, you're still up with 8C and 8D, unless Kurt, you have something to say first.
No, Matt, you can take over.
Okay.
Sure, my computer's just being a little slow here. Come on. All right, so the first document here, I've been doing this for the last 2 months now, just, as April ended and I was able to close out, or at least get ready for the bank rec, just updating where we sit with the budget. So as you can see, our spending in the middle column there was actually very comparable to last year. I don't have the exact amount, but not a lot of big, expenditures happening at this time. So, we're still sitting at about only 72% of our budget spent. Some of the decreases, as we know, will be in like transportation and some of those other areas. And then just going down the line, not the only area that's over is still that other area, which we know is due to scholarships. So, as the paychecks, all the salaries are kind of where you expect them to be. So not a lot of, when I sent this to Kurt, I said no surprises. So there really isn't anything noteworthy to talk about here. Just wanted to do this and show kind of where we're sitting. So any questions on any of the data here?
Matt, is that a JWP cap or is that a Lake Crystal cap?
This is actually a Viking. I don't know if my camera, my lighting in my office is terrible.
All right.
Yeah, I'm also in the no haircut club, so I'm covering it up. So now, if there's no questions on that, I'll just move into the 21 budget. This document is also should look pretty familiar. We did kind of pretty it up here, but the information should be the same. And once again, my computer is being slow. I should have loaded this ahead of time, I guess. Come on. All right. It's almost there. I do have this in Excel. Maybe I should go that route.
So just one quick question while Matt's computer is loading. Maybe Kurt, you can answer this. When I was looking at the 2021 fiscal year, and then we're looking at enrollment projections, and I see like the 11th graders this year, there's 50, but next year as seniors, there's only 40. Is that partly to do for some of the kids taking like PSEO and some of those courses too? We didn't actually lose 10 juniors in enrollment, did we?
I don't know.
Are you handling that, Kurt, or do you want me to?
Yeah.
I'm there now.
I was just looking up the facts. Yes, some of it is PSEO. Some of it is. I was just actually pulling up the exact data, and we actually do lose on average. I was going to look up the data. Some students from 10th to 11th grade. So we try to look at trends, and we've got some data from the state on that. Matt, you can take over if you have something to add.
Sure. Some of it too is actually it was a topic we just talked about earlier. But when kids at that ALC, we do lose them in enrollment as well. So we were trying to capture. We took some historical data where we were starting February or in the fall with a higher number, but we were ending lower just because of some of those transitions. So we were just trying to take some of that into account, as well as the PSEO. And once again, our objective here was to be conservative. So, 40 is, if we're talking about a range of guesses, 40 is on the low side, but still reasonable.
And real quick, if I were to add this, again, if you look at that number of 50 was actually your projections last year at this time. Our class size right now of juniors is 45. So we're 5 below that, and then we are, yes, projecting some PSEO, some people moving. So it's not necessarily a 10 from right now to next year.
All right.
Thanks.
If we're good there, so once again, we're budgeting with 640 in mind, 30 down from what we budgeted for in 20. So if we then scroll to the next page, you'll see that our revenue numbers, because of that 30 decrease, despite the state giving us 2% more and some of these other things the legislature has helped schools with, we are going to see a decrease here of about 200,000. I mean, 180 or 170, or somewhere in that range. So the basic formula, we're still higher there. There is a mechanism called declining enrollments as well. So when you do see a large decline in students, the state gives you a little one-time kickback to help cushion the blow. But that only is one time. So if we then next year stay around 640, those dollars would go away. And then the rest of it, special ed, that number is kind of always seem to grow. So we're keeping an eye on that. The latest projection from the state had us here, but this is kind of a moving target because you never know how much tuition billing between districts you'll end up with and some of those other factors. So keeping an eye there. And then the rest of it was all pretty normal. Some of the miscellaneous local was just some decreases in some of our interest earnings and some of our donations where, with the softball trip, we had a huge amount of donations. We're not obviously planning on that next year. So those are going away, and some other factors like that. Some of the sports are in there as well, of course. So, but once again, so about a 2% decrease in revenue is what our initial projection is. Going on to the next page.
Sorry, Matt, to stop you since we're on the slide. Just want to interject. Basic skills money is based upon our free and reduced lunch percentage. So as we try to increase that, even though we might not get, who knows how it works for our summer lunch program and breakfast program, there is some added benefit of increasing those funds if we do increase our enrollment for free and reduced students.
Yes, good point. Thank you.
Matt, did you send an email last week about the spec ed? And I know you kind of mentioned it, but I guess it's still nothing finalized in regards to going from 180 down to 90,000 deficit due to the spec ed, or we're just not for sure to even say that any longer?
Well, so when I had done the information I presented at the finance committee was based upon a pro forma version of their the state's projection form. So they released that in February, and they even said this is very preliminary at that time. And then between our finance committee and this meeting, they finally came out with the actual, here's our projection, and it was that between those two forms is where that difference came from. So, you know, the stuff that's in the new form, the one the state just put out, would be the most current information they have available. So I would definitely say that is the better of the two at this time. But once again, special ed is always kind of a moving target, and these are just, you know, our estimates based on, you know, they're using prior year information, some historical data, trends. So, but that's where that shift came from the information before to now. So while I feel better about it, you know, obviously if we're talking about conservatism, maybe it would, you know, keep in mind that maybe that number would come out lower in the end once tuition billing comes around. But that was at least how that happened. So. Good with revenue?
Is there anything? Or, yep.
All right. The next page is the expenditures, just broken down by kind of the areas. So we did see a decrease in salaries, which I know initially is a little jarring, but that is actually due to some of our, we're taking the basic skills dollars, since we do have a smaller pool this year, and as well as community ed standing up on its own. Appears to be. We're taking some of those preschool salaries that were in Fund 1 previously and putting it back all the way on to community ed as they become more self-sufficient. So that is actually helping out our general fund, or helping to that decrease, as well as we do have some, you know, we try to reflect all of our changes, and we've really hammered home salaries and benefits. We've had numerous meetings, so feeling really good about those numbers, at least with our current situation. And then the rest of it, we did 2% in areas that were kind of, you know, like your electricity and your water and some of those more reliable expenses. And then definitely with the deficit spending in mind, we tried to keep the supplies and the capital equipment budgets to as low as we felt reasonable. So those are those decreases there. So with all of that, we come up with about 9.2 million here. And a decrease of actually 3 million or 3%, 3.4%. So
I will say this, you know, we did go line by line with our administrators. We met as a large group once. I know we met actually in small groups at least once, and I met with them as well. One item that we, you know, made sure that we had enough funds set aside for was some curriculum, because we do have some updates that we need. I'll give you math expressions as one example. We have the 2011 edition. They're not having that in anymore, so we actually have to order something new for this next year. So we have, you know, put aside $10,000, $15,000 just for that. And there's a couple other curriculum pieces that we have to make sure that we're doing right by our students, and that's one area that we just can't get around, that we actually increased our funding for.
right.
So
Also, Mike Birding did a good job keeping the. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Looking at this, I do have one question. So I'm looking at 2018 and 19 actual for benefits, where it's at 1.1 million roughly. 2019 and 20, we're looking at almost close to 1.5 million. Why did it go up, 340,000 in 1 year for benefits?
I can't. I mean, I'd have to look to give you like all the details. Some of my assumptions would be, you know, we did with that negotiation, we did put more towards family, more towards single health insurance as a district. I think we actually added a couple FTEs in there, so we might have had more staff just in general, as well as, you know, the health insurance increases. if someone was taking an HSA contribution, some of that changes there. But in order to look at that more closely, I could give you an answer later. But
Matt, and I'm not saying that this is a large part of it, but with our previous superintendent leaving, paying out some of his benefit, that was a pretty decent percentage of that also, wasn't it?
Right, and I think we also had Scott leave that year, and we had one more. Bruce. So we might have had a triple whammy there with those severance payouts as well. So good catch on that one. I believe that is part of the deal.
Okay. Yeah, and I knew that we had paid out a little bit more, in health insurance and stuff and benefits, which would have started the 2019 year. That number just kind of caught me off guard just a little bit. So thank you.
Sure. Any other questions as we look at expenditures here?
After you're done, Kurt, Matt, I just want to ask Kurt a quick question. So.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
So, Kurt, the question I have to you is, so you and it's not a budget. Well, it's not a budget question, but you said that some of our seniors may go to ACLS, right? Which means they're enrolling to Waseca. If, let's say, it's 5 students or whatever it is, if any of those do not graduate, since they've enrolled to Waseca, does that go against our graduation rates if they don't graduate, if they enrolled to ACLS per Waseca?
The simple answer is I don't know.
Okay.
MDE has a weird formula. It's about percentage of time, and I don't know how that works with ALCs, but I will write it down and get back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If we're done with the details, just kind of the summary of what that results of the year would put us at is on the next page. Once again, the 19 through 20 row is just based on the revised budget. So that 3.7 million ending is, not an actual amount yet. But then rolling that forward into the bottom line, looking at the results from 21's budget that we just presented, we would bring down to about 3.7, rounding up there. The verbiage here about the policy, just reminding you, we do have a goal of 25% of unrestricted. So that would include unassigned, committed, assigned, fund balance. We want that at 25%, which you would look at that 9.2 million as our estimate to base that on, which puts us at about 2.3. Fund balance would be our goal. So still well above, and I think there's reason to believe right now that 3.7 won't actually be a reality. Hopefully that'll be higher with some of the end of the year results we're going to be seeing here in May and June for the current year. But so obviously we don't want to, even get close to that 2.3 anytime soon, but just trying to show the reality there. And then finally on the last page, just looking at community service and debt service would be the only new information. So even with taking back all those salaries into community service, we are projecting them to pretty much hold steady. I guess that's about another 15,000 or so there for fund balance increase. So, and debt or food service, we're still working with Taher on getting a budget for that. So right now we've left those blank until we hear more. So any further questions?
I just want to make a couple comments. Number one, I want to reiterate the fact that we are projecting our community service fund being self-sufficient next year. And I think that's outstanding. And Andrew's done a great job leading that department. The second thing I do want to point out is that it's worth noting you as a board have done phenomenal in your leadership the past number of years to build this fund balance. I can tell you other superintendents are saying we have a month of money in the bank to pay, and they're laying off a ton of people and really worried about what's happening. As we are too, we're worried, we're watching our budget, but you at least had the forefront to set aside some money because it's going to be uncertain what happens next year, whether we're able to do school age care this summer or whether how we start the year. So I do have to commend this board for being forward thinking and being able to set aside funds.
With that, I will just add, this budget was set up with assuming everything as far as a normal year would occur. So obviously, if any of the reaches from COVID creep into our 21, we'll obviously take that into account at that time.
Anything else, Matt?
Nope. I think that's my thing for now.
All right. And thank you, Kurt, for the compliment. I didn't get my mute off fast enough. So thank
Tim
you.
Johnson, I saw you took off. I mean, did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, no, I didn't know I took it off.
Nope, all good. Hey, and the second thing that I will add is that, of course, you're going to approve fiscal year 21 budget in June. We are going to have at least one more finance committee meeting before that, just to look at the final budget presentation to the board. Because even now, we're still making some budget adjustments. I just know I emailed Matt today. Here's a couple more things that we need to discuss. So this isn't the final picture, but we at least wanted to give you a preview of what you're going to see in June. Finance committee is going to see this one more time.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? All right. Thanks, Matt. We will move on to, well, it looks like 8A again. I didn't even notice that before, but the resolution establishing dates for filing affidavits of candidacy. I don't know how much we need to talk about that. That's just for those of us that are up to run again for school board, to make sure that we get our I guess I don't know what it's really called that we sign, but between July 31st, 2020 and August 14th of 2020.
That would be for anyone, Laura, not just the current board members, but all of them.
How many seats are open or going to be open?
3, I believe. So, yep. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I didn't mean to imply that it was just that. So, yep. That's for anyone. So we have to do a resolution on that. We do that now, right, Kurt? Or are we doing
that will be on the May 18th board agenda. This is just a preview. That's what's going to be there.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Any questions on that right now? Okay, we will go on to 8F, board meeting time. We did have a question of whether we wanted to go back to the 5:30 start. I know we had changed it to 6 more for the spring sports, and that unfortunately did not happen. So just wanted to throw that out there if we wanted to discuss it now and put it on the agenda for the regular board meeting if we want to change the times back.
Are we discussing it now, or do you want to discuss it at the board meeting?
Well, if we want to put a recommendation, I think we would want to probably discuss it now. Or if we want to recommend a time change for the next meeting.
Well, from what I understood, there was a board member that brought forth that they wanted to change it possibly from 6 to 5:30. That's why it's come up, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So, I mean, for me, you know, I'm not running again, so I don't really have a lot of input. I would prefer, personally, I would prefer going back to 5:30. It's just more convenient coming into town from work and just not having that little gap. I don't notice the difference between 5:30 and 6 when it comes to sporting activities. That's just my personal opinion, but you know, I'm sure there probably is other board members that want to speak on behalf of it that brought this up. So
I was the one that asked the question. I really had no preference. I was just curious with the current climate and if we're going back. But I am fine with either time, surely.
Anyone else?
well, if no one is objecting to the time, then for the most part, then there's no reason to bring it forth to the board meeting on May 18th.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly. I mean, if we're good with it, I just don't think we should keep switching it back and forth.
Right.
You know, so it's like if nobody really has an issue with it, I think we just keep it at 6 and just move forward.
Okay. Anyone else? I know I personally too prefer the 5:30 just rolling into it. It gets a little tricky when we try to have meetings prior to our board meetings instead of doing them after because we have to get done at a certain time. So that just makes the nights longer than too if we have to put meetings afterwards. But I agree that we don't want to keep switching back and forth as well. So I think we just need to decide if we want to change it or if we're just going to leave it.
Is there anybody really opposed to the 5:30 time? Sounds like most people that have talked said it could go either way, and I could go either way as well. I probably prefer 5:30, and I'm trying to think all the way into next fall again too with sporting events and stuff. But even in summertime, I feel like I'm waiting for 6 o'clock to come now. It's like you kind of get that hour in there between work and the meeting, but.
Yeah, and I know for me when I coach bowling, we usually start at 6:30, so it's easier for me to do the 5:30 ones. But I'm just one person too, so I don't know with the other sporting events in the fall and winter and stuff how that affects the rest of you.
Well, I prefer 5:30 myself. So I mean,
I would agree that we don't want to just keep continuing to change the meeting time, especially for the public that wants to get online and stay on top of being on time to the meetings. I guess, I was the one that had requested for it to be moved to 6 o'clock so that I could try and be there for my kids' sporting events, which obviously it's not happening this spring or summer, but once we get back into the swing of things in the fall and the winter, then we're kind of back in the same situation. Right now, personally, I would love to have it even at 7 o'clock just because I am off on Mondays. But again, that's just me and everybody else has to be taken into consideration. So.
I guess preference wise, again, I'm going to be off here in 6 months. So, but you're going to be changing it. If you're going to keep it, then you're going to have to decide in January if you want it at 5:30 or 6. And I get the sports thing, but I also don't know how much you're gaining by a 30-minute window from having it at 5:30 to 6 o'clock when it comes to sports. But it's been a while since I had junior high kids also. So, but I guess, Laura, why don't you just keep it? If people reach out to you in regards to wanting it moved, then if there's a majority then that reach out to you, then let's put it on the agenda. If you don't hear from people, then and let's just leave it unless we want to decide right now. But I think we're already kind of doing, we're borderline on a straw poll right now anyway. So I think if there's someone that's strong, has a strong opinion, then let's put it on the agenda. We'll reach out to you and put it on the agenda for the May 18th meeting. So.
And I'll throw this out there too. We did at one point talk about possibly morning meetings too. And I don't know if that's still an option, but.
Well, if COVID's still going on and I'm working from home next year, that'd be great.
Bite your tongue, Johnson.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is we'll just leave it at 6 for now, and we can always revisit at our organizational meeting in January again.
Or if someone reaches out to you and wants it on the agenda, we just put it to a vote again and just be done with it. So.
Okay. All right. So yeah, if you guys want some time to think about it, you know, our meeting will be in a couple weeks. So if you want to think about it some more, we can always add it then. So. Any other comments? Okay. If not, our upcoming meetings are May 18th, regular meeting that we will plan to meet in person. Hopefully, hopefully the stay-at-home order will be lifted by then. And then June 15th, regular meeting, and July 13th, regular meeting. Anything else anybody has before we adjourn?
Just that we're going to have a quick policy meeting. I believe Tim Johnson, Tim Elke, and you, Chair Sizer, on that committee. If you just want to stay on this Google Meet, and we'll discuss some stuff after.
All right. Meeting is adjourned at 7:11 then.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Do I need to project anything, or